Hello everyone and welcome to the Indigenous Voice. First, I would like to say thanks to volunteers and Shaw TV who make this show possible. And in the first part of this show today, we have with us Elder Tom Sampson. Hello, Elder Tom Sampson. It's again an honor to have you again and to hear from you. And I wonder what you'd like to talk about today in the first part.
Well, I guess there's so many issues today, that surrounding the whole issue of Indigenous rights, the tribes and people across Canada. They are, especially in the issue regarding the Native women, Aboriginal women, missing women
And girls.
There's been a long protest about the inquiry process is not working, and some of the provinces are saying that maybe the Inquiries Act is not doing what it should do in order to meet the needs of the people who need to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
And it's some of them are saying we have to establish our own process so we can get to deal with the families that need to say something about their girls and their children. So it's kind of hard to say right now. I think there's been agreement that they should go ahead again for another couple of years, but if they don't change the Inquiries Act or deal with the concerns that the people have with it, then it's just going to create more conflict because they're already having conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to take a hard look at the policies of the government itself, whether it's the Inquiries Act or taking a look at the other issues regarding the state of Indigenous people in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the process, now that they've separated the Minister of Indigenous Affairs and the Minister of Corporate Affairs. They've separated them now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not quite sure what that means, Does it mean that the issue of the Crown, is that to be separate from everything else? And does it mean that the other portfolio within Indigenous affairs, dealing with programs and policies, is it going to make life easier or make things work better? Our experience has been that it just hasn't worked because they're still connected to the old problem of the Indian Act, they want to make an amendment, but there are so many sections that affect the membership code, for example, that I don't know how they're going to deal with it. Because most tribes in this country, Canada, most of them have a code of their own regarding membership code based on lineage, how it works throughout time. Whether it's a man or a woman, those lineages are never broken. But because of the Indian Act, we've got non-status Indians, we've got all kind of Indians.
Band member, non-band member,
Yeah.
on reserve, non-on reserve, and registered, not registered. I know.
So I don't know why they keep talking about making an amendment, when really, if there's to be an amendment, it should come directly from the community. It should not happen at the Ottawa level, at the Senate level. It shouldn't happen there. It should happen here, right in our communities, so we can decide within Coast Salish country who is a Coast Salish person and and which tribe does he belong to, which family does he belong to. Right now, it's a mess, and people are losing land, losing status. Children are being. I guess that's why they had this problem with the children being taken away. You know, the Scoop 60s they call it, where all the children were being taken out of the homes, because the Indian Act did allow that to happen, where they make a decision, yes, the family is not capable to manage their family or children, so they would take them away. Not only here in Canada, but some of them ended up in the United States, probably all over the world, I guess, you know. So these changes that are coming about, and whether the Prime Minister who said he was going to walk with us and we would solve the problem together, the people would solve the problem together. Not the Senate, not the Standing Committee in Ottawa, but the people at the community level. That's not what we're hearing. We're hearing something very different. You know, the changes that they're proposing will always start from the top and have to go from the Senate to the members of Parliament and then out into the community. Well, we're back where we started. You know, it's not only about the time that takes to do that, but it's the money that's involved. It's time consuming and it's costing a lot of money. And the reason I think they want to control it at the top is because they can continue to use the two languages that are recognized in the Constitution, which is French and English. Well, Indigenous rights doesn't come out of French and it doesn't come out of English. It comes out of our language. So the people at the community level then, and this is what they're saying, what I heard on the news in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, where they're saying the people wants to determine their own process. They don't want somebody telling them how they should do it. And governments and bureaucrats are so used of just...
So the government and bureaucrat are the obstacle in front of this new direction?
Well, I'm not quite sure about this because, you know, a lot of the bureaucrats that I'm talking about are not all federal bureaucrats. Some are the members of the tribe. You know, the band councils are an extension of the Department of Indian Affairs because of the Indian Act. It's not that we chose to have it that way. It's imposed on us that the band council becomes a corporation rather than a government. So they fall under the Corporations Act of British Columbia and Canada. And because of that, it makes it easier for the government to propose processes like the Inquiries Act, because it's a federal thing. And it comes down to us, and then the band councils have to play the rules of the Corporation Society Act. So we're caught in a you know, a political mess, I think, you know, where we need to continue to tell the government, if the people who were talking last week, I think, in Manitoba, protesting, they said, we want our own process. The Inquiries Act does not work for us. So I think the government of Canada, because now they've divided into two portfolios, one dealing with programs and policies, the other one dealing with matters of the Crown. Now, no one's really sure what that means either. You know, I haven't seen any document that tells us what's the difference, or is there any difference? You know, we haven't seen that yet, and some lawyers said we don't know yet what that means. So you've got a lot of people across Canada wondering what's this splitting of the Indigenous minister from a Crown corporation into, I mean, to deal with the Crown and then to deal with policies and programs, the other portfolio. So we haven't really, I haven't personally, maybe our band offices have got the information, but I sure as heck haven't seen it. What does it mean? I don't think anybody knows. Some of the lawyers who are far from the community, they don't know either. I was watching the news the other night, and the guy from the Inuit was saying, we really don't know what this means yet. So I don't know why they propose things like this when they've been told time and again. What gets organized at the top and pushed to the bottom doesn't work. It's got to come from the bottom up before it works. And there's an assumption, I guess, by government, not just this government, but all previous governments, that we are not quite capable yet of understanding the language, let alone look after our own communities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was watching a professor at UVic the other day, and him analyzing what does this mean. He said, well, under the Indian Act, it means these people, these Indians or Indigenous people, according to the Act, they still have to be treated like children. They're still not capable of managing land, managing anything. That's what this professor was saying. So even the institutions don't know yet, I don't think, what it really means, the splitting of the portfolio of Indigenous affairs.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of confusion that's out there now.
What about the splitting of other issue, like when we have the inquiry about missing and murder women and girls from one hand, and we have the talk about residential schools on the other hand, and also with the talk about reconciliations, but there is no such a talk about the system behind that. They are not connecting it to the colonial system that produced these phenomena, as they are isolated issue and could be deal with them without, again, connecting it to the root cause.
Well, my experience with that kind of process, what I've seen over the years, we've had taking control of Indian education. Well, that never happened. Self-government, self-governance, that hasn't happened. All these documents get compiled and they're all over the place. Changes to the social assistance, regulations, all this stuff has come before us in a kind of process that is being proposed again. The splitting of that portfolio and the Crown, what is Crown? What does it really mean? Mm-hmm. Does it mean it's only those issues that the Crown can be taken to court, and if they don't agree with Aboriginal rights and treaty rights, is that only a Crown issue? Is that what the government is saying? We don't know that. I don't know it, because we haven't been told. I haven't seen anything yet. And if the tribal councils or bands have been informed about that, what it means, they sure as heck haven't told the membership yet what it means. So there's a massive job ahead of us, you know, once we find out what this really means. And I've talked to lawyers, and they said, well, you know, I can give you my opinion as a lawyer. So if you ask 20 lawyers, you'll probably get 20 opinions, which takes us back to, now what? We don't know that yet. But we have told them time and time again, we know what we want. We know what our laws say. We know what Indigenous law means. We know what membership code means. We know what economic development means. We know the process of disciplining people who do not obey our laws. We have a process for that. In fact, it was tried that we tried that in the courts already. In the 80s and the 90s, we had gone through to set up our own court system, using or having the opportunity to deal with the family and children services, where the judge said he didn't want to get involved in deciding who owns the child, which side of the family does the child go to. And the judge said, "Can you do it?" And he said, "Yes, we can." And we did. We provided a council of elders that would sit down and determine under our law who owns the child and where does the child's best opportunity to grow as a child without having to have to decide whether he lives with one side of the family or the other. What the elders did, they incorporated the two to come together and said, let us agree on what is the best for the child. And the two families, the elders of the family were the ones who spoke. And they said, we will agree to let this child live with his father. And here are the conditions for it. And they laid it out. And the family where the father was going to get custody of the child, he had to agree with the other family. Yes, I will never do anything that will not offend the other family in terms of the rights of the child on the other side of the family. I'll take a drink here. So we've done that already. We've been able to handle it through our own justice system and how best to, instead of fighting and argue over a child, who's the best parent or grandparent or best one to look after the child. It's about the child. And the elders did a wonderful job. It got a lot of compliments across British Columbia. And the Attorney General of Canada, the Attorney General of British Columbia are all aware of that we are capable of handling our own justice system. And that's just one about the justice. Economic development, social development, education, all those things have been laid out on what we're supposed to do or what we have to do to make sure that our children grow up in a good way, not only within our community, but outside of the community, meeting with other children that they would eventually work with, whether it's in an office or in some business of some kind. Our children have already learned how to do that. But because the education system wants us to learn only one way, and I haven't heard to this day how that would work, in terms of the institution, because the Supreme Court of Canada and Supreme Court judges in British Columbia have said it is the duty of the institutions to understand Indigenous law and Indigenous rights, including treaty rights. It's the duty of the institutions to do that. They hire people that don't come from our community. They hire people who have all kinds of degrees, but have never lived with us. When we talk about knowing one another, It's just like I told you about that little boy that came, had supper with us one time. You know,
Fish,
he wanted to know what we were like. What do these Indian people eat? Well, he found out we eat fish heads. So he learned something. The public is not prepared yet to understand us. They're still far from it.
Is that because they never acknowledge the original sin they have done? Do you think, like the whole process of eradicating or pushing the indigenous community out of their homeland and their territory, push them to a little ghettos? Do you think because they don't want to acknowledge that original mistake, it's like that, or what is the reason why they don't want?
Well, you know, I've traveled across this country. I've been to Montreal, Quebec, way back east. I went to the villages in Montreal, Kanawagi, and it's a different kind of a community. I mean, all their houses are lined up. You don't know the difference between once you step out of the city and into the Mohawk reservation, because they've already learned to live like that. There are still some people in this country that don't want to live like that. They want to be able to live according to their culture, what their culture teaches. And I've heard a lot of stories as I traveled this country over the last 30, 40 years and got up to Inuit country where there's snow and ice all year round. This is about 20 years ago now. And so there's a joke that they joke about. They said, oh, we had a guy up here trying to sell us a fridge. And you know, what do you do with a fridge where the temperature is 40 below? So that kind of thing is happening. We've got people, consultants, business people. We've got to make these people like us. They're so determined to change us. And we told them, we don't mind what you're doing, but let us be who we are. Let us understand our own spiritual way. Let us understand the land and understand what we've always known, our relationship with everything. Let us have that. Let us keep
Our
that.
way of life.
But, you know, this whole argument and issue regarding the Salish Sea and Kinder Morgan, the traffic out in the ocean, it's just far beyond repair. It can never be repaired. Because of the sound, the ocean at one time, when we were young, there were no outboards and motorboats in our bay there. There was inboards, but they were silent. They had mufflers. And you could see them, but you couldn't hear them. Now the sound is underneath the water, and it goes, the vibration, the sound is killing everything underneath the ocean. And people don't understand that. You know, the tanker traffic, the skidoos, or I don't know what they call those ones they have in the ocean, those boats, little boats that speed around. They're a pain in the butt, you know, because they make so much noise. And it's, the humans have no understanding of respect and honor of other things. They don't know that. The fish, everything under the ocean needs peace and quiet. But that's not what's happening.
Not under the ocean, also outside the ocean, also around us.
Well, you know, where I live in Brentwood Bay there, you know, it's summertime is airplane time. Planes are flying in and out of out of our bay there because the tourists going in to visit Butchard's Gardens and other things they want to see or enjoy. Well, that's fast disappearing. You know, we have the fireworks every Saturday night, so everybody gathers up down to the ferry wharf to watch the fireworks. But what does that do to the birds and those things that are already sleeping?
Mhm.
You know, what about them?
Actually, it's known that even a lot of people who own pets, like dogs, for example, they run away when they hear that kind of noise, and it's make them frustrated. I mean, it's actually, yes, it's disturb human and other creature who are living with us.
You see, and then they wonder why so many things are disoriented now. You know, you go up into the mountains and you hear motorbikes and all that noise up there now. And the deer, the cougar, the bear are moving away from there. And they're moving into peace and quiet, like uplands where there is quiet up there. They know where to go where it's quiet and peaceful. But the humans don't want them either. You know, they're overpopulated there. And then they go back to the mountain and you hear all the noise and everything's different now. Where at one time you could hear an echo, a sound miles away. Now it's not there. It's gone.
Elder Tom, I think we are out of time, but we went to talking from an important subject and to talking lately about the noise, which is also another important subject. But you mentioned before about the Kinder Morgan and the new premier decision about let it for people. So we have left like a minute or two.
Well, what we saw here, it was on the Voices of BC here on this channel.
On channel number 4.
I forget the guy's name, McInnes or something like that. I forget now. But he said, you know what really frightens the people of British Columbia? Here you got a premier there saying, we will use every tool in the toolbox to stop Kinder Morgan. Now he's saying, well, we'll do what's good for the people. So you can see now there's something different happening.
I asked you previously, you still have hope within the new government. I personally, I don't. I think they are all the same. But this is, as you said, an indication, and let's see how things will go. Elder Tom, thank you very much for giving us your time. And hopefully in 2 weeks from now, we'll talk again.
Well, I'll try to be home.
Thanks
okay,
again.
thank you for inviting me.
Thanks a lot, Elder Tom. And thanks for watching this part of Indigenous Voice. Welcome back to the second part of Indigenous Voice, and in this part we have with us Eddy, Charlie, and Kristin Spray, and we are going to talk today about the Orange T-shirt Day, or Orange Shirt Day, sorry. Eddy, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself before we start?
Mazen is asking for you to share a little bit about yourself.
My name is Eddy Charlie. I'm from the Culture Nation, and I come from a family of many people that have been involved in the residential school, that being my grandparents and my parents, my brother and my sister, and many of my cousins. And the residential school was created to assimilate the Indigenous people from into the mainstream culture, and the younger children were targeted so that they could destroy the language in the Indigenous language right there. And to do that, they created residential schools. And in the schools, they pretty much just abused a lot of their children, beat them up when they were speaking their language and practicing their own culture. And the schools were pretty much like prisons rather than schools. And the children were not fed very well. They were beaten up quite frequently, and they were sexually abused while they were in these schools. And because it happened so many times over a long period of time, because some of the kids were in the school for 1 year to 7 years. And when the children came out, it was almost like normal for them that this abuse was happening and had happened. And then when they got home and they seen that same type of behavior happening in their community, it was too normal for them to not see that event as being wrong. So what we're doing here by creating Orange Shirt Day is to create a safe place where people can have conversations about residential school issues, not so that we can educate non-Indigenous people, but so we can educate our own people too. Because right now, our people living in a complete blanket of denial that there is a problem that exists, and we certainly need to have conversations about this so that the younger generation can have the opportunity to understand that this type of behavior that's happening in our community is not normal, and we need to talk about it. And I think it's really important that the younger generation understand it, because they're right now are suffering the most. We have a lot of suicides happening in our community. We have high rates of alcoholism and drug addiction, and all the younger generation are turning to a life of crime to support their alcohol and drug addictions. And so I feel that it's very important that Orange Shirt Day grows and people have this kind of conversation that we initiate in the community right now.
Mm-hmm. And when we say we are talking, of course, here about Kristin. Kristin, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you meet Eddy and working on this project together?
Thank you, Mazen. Well, first I'd like to acknowledge being on the traditional Lekwungen territories, and just so grateful to be asked to come here and share. In 2013, I attended the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Vancouver, and it was there that I heard a number of people share about their experience attending residential school. I witnessed many people sharing, sometimes for the first time, what had gone on in their childhoods, as well as how that impacted the rest of their life. And there was a lot of abuse, and even abuse that was incited and encouraged from the authority figures, priests and nuns, to children against one another. So there was a real lack of trust that happened there. One of the people who shared was Phyllis Webstad of Dog Creek Nation, and she actually shared her story about being 6 years old and attending residential school. On the first day she arrived, she had a sparkly orange shirt on that her grandmother had saved up money to buy, and so she was quite proud of this shirt. She was probably a little nervous about, leaving her grandmother, but they took that orange shirt from her and left her with terrible memories, and she hated the color orange. And I remember thinking about that story and several other people that left great impacts on my heart. I was very impacted and felt a sense of responsibility I've grown up as a visitor on this land with European background of English, Irish, German, and Scottish. And I had never heard about residential school until my early 20s. And there's so much to learn. So I went back to school in 2014. I went to the Indigenous Studies program at Camosun College, and that's where Eddy and I met as classmates.
Tell us a little bit about that, this department in Camosun. What is it about?
Asking about what department it is at Camosun College.
The Indigenous Studies?
Yes.
Well, it's not a department actually. The Indigenous Studies is a program where they teach about leadership and about culture to Indigenous people, so that they can learn about their identity and the Indigenous way of being. And that's from based on knowledge gathered from elders and educators, and they help us find a way to reconnect to our own cultures and our own backgrounds, and we become leaders in the community. And the program leaders are Todd Ormiston and Janice Simcoe, and that's where Orange Shirt Day grew from, that relationship between the Indigenous department, which is called Squalawan, and Kristin and I. It took almost a year for the first Orange Shirt Day to happen when we first met, though, because Kristin asked me if I would work with her to create Orange Shirt Day for Victoria, and I don't think she was aware yet that I was a survivor of residential school. So I didn't answer her at first, but she kept asking me for almost one whole year, and it took me that long to finally agree. So in 2015, when she asked me in September on the second term in the Indigenous Studies program, I went to the library and did some research, and and we took a really huge risk by creating the first Orange Shirt Day for Victoria. And why do I say we took a great risk?
Yes.
Is because this is a very powerful journey for anybody, because there are a lot of hurt memories in the community. There were 150,000 children that were taken away from their homes forcibly and placed in residential schools from British Columbia to parts of Ontario and Newfoundland. And there were 139 residential schools. So many of these children that were placed in these schools still live with the memories of what happened to them. So having somebody like me and Kristin bring Orange Shirt Day to Victoria, it's like us bringing back memories that they fought so hard to forget. But I have a really good reason to bring Orange Shirt Day to Victoria, because I am a survivor myself. I understand the impact. I lived that impact, and so I know what it means to carry the scars around. And the reason why I feel that we need to have Orange Shirt Day here is because many people are still looking for their identity that was ripped from their hearts, and they need to find that identity, and they need to find that culture. In order for them to grow, they need to have that identity and culture. Orange Shirt offers that that safe place for them to have the conversation that Orange Shirt Day is all about. When we first thought about bringing Orange Shirt Day to Victoria, an elder came to us and talked to us about a little boy that she met on one of the reserves in Victoria, and she saw the boy had a cut on his knee. So she asked the little boy to come over and sit down and tell the story about that cut that the little boy had on his knee. And the little boy started crying as soon as he started telling her the story that he thought that nobody cared that he had a cut on his knee. And he just started crying as he was telling her that nobody cared. And then for 6 months, this elder kept on going back to this boy and asking him to repeat the story. And then finally, after the 6th month, she approached him again. This time, he didn't cry when he started telling her the story about the cut on his knee. He said that it hurt at first, but now he can walk and it feels okay. The reason why that elder told us his story is because the more that little boy talked about the cut on his knee, the easier it became for him to begin healing. And that's what Orange Shirt Day is going to do for the survivors of the residential school. The more we go out there and start talking about residential school, the easier it becomes for them to begin their own healing. They will find their own path towards healing by talking. And I think that is a really, really important, because it's a really heavy story to talk about the residential school. I mean, there are 80,000 survivors still alive today.
80,000,
And
Here in BC?
yes, not in BC,
In
all of Canada. And I can guarantee you that those 80,000 survivors have an impact on everybody they come
Around
into
them.
connection with. That trauma, that intergenerational trauma, is not something that is very easy to deal with at all. If, let's just say this, one day you wake up, somebody comes knocking on your door, and they take your children away, and they take them into a residential school, and they tell you that you can't do anything, you can't say anything. If you try to stop them, they will arrest you and put you in jail, and you may never ever see your children again. So it's not just the children that have been impacted, it's the many grandparents and the many parents who had to watch helplessly as their children were removed from the only community that they knew, the only community that can teach them the family values that they lost, the language and the culture that sustained them for thousands of years. Without that, these children were lost spirits. And we need to find a way to bring these family values back to these survivors of the residential school. And I feel strongly that Orange Shirt Day will give them that opportunity to do that.
And, it's, and sadly, that this so sad part you're talking about, it's less than a chapter of the colonial process here, taking the kids. We are not talking about taking first the land, taking your way of living, and now adding also suddenly, as one elder once said, you woke up one day and the whole village, you don't see kids anymore. You don't have kids in the street and in the town. You don't hear their voice. This is when she told me that, I kind of, it's really difficult to imagine. Can you imagine, like, you are living in a town has no kids in it, playing on the street, only elders, and I don't know if you heard everything I said, Eddy. If Kristin, maybe you can.
Mazen was saying that, the sad part about the residential school is that that's actually, just one chapter in a long colonial history of settlers and uninvited guests coming here and taking land and taking language and cultures, and then the children, and then having, communities without the children, just adults and elders walking around.
It's so difficult to imagine that, what I mean. It's
I agree with you, but I want to say something else about that too. When my parents went to residential school and some of the other people from that generation, when they came back home, they had an impact on the community, and impact was not very nice. When these children came home from the residential school, they were taught how to be mean. They fought to survive, and they would do anything to remain standing up. So when they came home, they were very fierce people. They were very aggressive in nature. They were not the young, innocent children that were taken away from their homes. They came back very mean because some bad things were done to them. So when they came home, they reacted in a way that was not normal, and they didn't know how to stop it. So they hurt a lot of people in their own family, in their own communities. But these people had restrictions placed on them. They weren't allowed to just wander wherever they wanted to because they had government rules at that time. But when their children, that being my generation, when we went to residential school and we came back home, yes, we faced the same kind of abuse that our parents did. We were physically abused, we were sexually abused, and we were starved and treated very badly. And yes, we came home just as angry as our parents did, but we did not have the same restrictions that our parents had on them. We could go anywhere. There was nothing that could stop us from doing anything. So my generation had easy access to alcohol. We had easy access to drugs, and we could go downtown and do anything we wanted to do, and that's exactly what we did. So think about this. You have 150,000 children that go into residential school. They come back changed. They're different, they're meaner, and they're bad. Now when they come out, they're going to want revenge. And they take it out on the people that they assume care for them and that they should care about. They don't just hurt their family. They hurt the people that they go to school with. They hurt the people that they go to work with. And they hurt the people that should be their friends or colleagues. So residential school didn't just have an impact on the survivors and their families. They had an impact on anybody that come into contact with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it's really, really important for Orchard to create this conversation so people can understand just how deeply impacted residential school survivors are. I mean, if you look at Victoria or Vancouver or Ottawa, it doesn't matter. There are many drug addicts living on the street. There, alcoholics. Our prisons are overrepresented by Indigenous people because these Indigenous people learn something very, very bad from a residential school, and they're living it every day. And our children are learning from us, and because they see they see us behaving in such a way, they think it's okay. But us taking all that abuse that we did in the residential school, we almost normalized that kind of behavioral pattern. So we don't think there's anything wrong with us doing what we do. And sometimes I walk around on the street and I see Indigenous people slapping their children around in public and screaming at them, and they don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. This is something that we picked up from the residential school, and we're passing it on to the younger generation. We need to have this conversation with our communities, our families, and anybody that will listen. The more people we speak to, the easier it becomes for us to have other people open up and see that that haunted feeling that lives dark in their heart does not need to stay there. When we start to speak about it, the courage and strength that lives in our heart gets spread around to other people that hear us and take part in our conversation. So that is one of the main reasons why Kristin and I feel so strongly about bringing Orange Shirt Day to Victoria.
Kristin, would you tell us a little bit more about the idea of the orange shirt and how started? I mean, you mentioned you met Eddy and you worked on it, but how since the first? It's in 2015, is that correct?
The first Orange Shirt Day was in 2013 in Williams Lake, led by Phyllis Webstad, who this is her life story. And then Eddy and I met 2014, and 2015 was the first year we held it at Camosun. But in 2014, when I walked on campus, and I was nervous, there's a lot I had to learn, and I was still carrying so many memories and imprints of stories that I had witnessed. I felt a sense of responsibility, as I said, as well as sadness that there were so many people walking by that didn't know and don't know about the history on this land that has taken place with Indigenous people, that's still going on today with the Indian Act, the residential school, and the trauma that has been left over. And many people don't understand. They'll say, oh yes, we've heard about residential school, but that's not enough. We need to have relationship, healthy, respectful relationship. As a non-Indigenous person, I feel a strong desire to learn and to listen again and to keep listening. And so when I met Eddy, I knew that just like Phyllis Webstad, Eddy's voice needed to be heard. His story was important. Not me, not how I would tell it. I haven't experienced this, but the people at Camosun, the people in our city, the people in our communities and in this country need to hear from people who feel safe enough to share about what has gone on for them. So one of the most important things too I want to say in Orange Shirt Day is my relationship of friendship with Eddy. If things aren't well between Eddy and myself, then there's no point in me being a part of Orange Shirt Day. I think Orange Shirt Day stands for Every Child Matters. And I'm so proud of Eddy, and I'm grateful to Eddy because he not only has walked a very tough road, but he continues to sacrifice by sharing and bringing up these stories and what he walks through still today and yesterday. And so I'm very grateful. On September 30th at Centennial Square, it's a Saturday, we'll be having a city ceremony of Orange Shirt Day. Eddy wrote a proclamation that was accepted by the mayor, Lisa Helps, and it will officially be declared Orange Shirt Day, Every Child Matters across the city. And so we're going to have ceremony there starting at 12 noon till 4 o'clock. We have shirts available and for sale. Our very good friend Bear Horn of Say Out Nation, he created this design of the bear, the eagle, the hummingbirds, and the flowers.
Very nice,
he will be in attendance there as well to share more about the design. And we're also working with Bridges for Women's Society, who have been teaching us so much and so gracious. We'll have shirts available there.
Victoria Bruden.
Victoria, in Victoria, Bridges Women's Society for
Yes,
Women.
And I think the CEO is Victoria Bruden, I think.
Oh, yes.
And who
Victoria Pruden.
She's a lovely, lovely woman, and she's been before on the show.
She is.
So just to repeat that, it's this Saturday, the Saturday, the 30th of September.
Saturday, September 30th, so the very end of the month. And throughout this month, Eddy and I commit ourselves as we did last year, to wearing orange shirts every day. We're also really committed to healing and to work on ceremony, because September is a tough month. It's a month that a lot of people have hard memories and also triggers for their experience with residential school.
I want to add something to what she said. As we created Orange Shirt Day for Victoria, we walked around in many communities. We talked to various elders and schools and people on the street. And a lot of people that we speak to ask us, why are you guys still talking about Orange Shirt Day? I mean, residential school. The residential school happened long ago, and the government gave you guys billions of dollars. Why are you guys still crying about this? This happened long ago. Forget about it. Move on. I want to say that that is not so. Residential school didn't happen long ago. The last residential school closed in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
And people are still living that haunted memory almost every day. And the thing is, in its place, something else, exactly like the residential school took its place, and it's called FD, the Ministry of Children and Family Development.
Mm-hmm.
In a residential school, they came and took the children away and put them in a residential school away from the parents. Now the Ministry of Children and Family Development is doing exactly the same thing, removing the children away from their family. So it's just got another name, but it's exactly the same thing.
Story. And as you said, it's not an old story. The effect of it, we can see it up to today. Eddy, Kristin, thank you very much for being in the show. We are out of time, but I hope we will come back again and talk after the 30th of September, because people, as you said, need to know more about that.
Thank you
Thanks
very
again,
much.
and thanks for watching this part of Indigenous Voice.